Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Emily Martin. I'm NCEDA's Program Manager, and we're very excited to have you all with us. Before getting started, I'd like to review the logistics of this webinar platform. You'll see on the screen a few important logistics to read through as attendees. To reiterate, all attendees are muted and will stay muted during the presentation. The best viewing option for your screen is called Speaker View, which you'll see as a viewing option at the top of your screen. We'll have a live Q&A session at the end of the presentation. During that segment and any time during the presentation, you can type your question into the Q&A box. To access this option, click Q&A at the bottom of your screen and then type in your question. These questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. If we are unable to answer all the questions live, NCEDA will send out a response sheet to all the participants afterwards. Of note, we will not be checking the chat box, so make sure to type in your questions in the Q&A box. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent to all registrants to use as a resource. At this time, I'd like to introduce NCEDA board member Josh Hollingsy, who will offer welcoming remarks and introduce our presenters.
Good afternoon, everybody. Josh Hollingsy here. I serve on the board of directors for NCEDA and chair the professional development committee. Welcome to the latest edition of NCEDA's webinar series. No, this is not between two ferns. This is about workforce analytics and community data tools. We have a great turnout for what promises to be a great discussion. Today's topic is the result of membership survey circulated by the professional development committee. You asked to learn more about data tools and workforce demographics, and today's webinar is a direct response to that. We feel very fortunate to have 4 of the state's best economic development researchers taking part in the discussion. I'll introduce them in a moment, but first I wanted to thank NCEDA's annual sponsors. These are the companies and organizations that stand with our organizations and its mission year-round, supporting the full complement of our programs. You'll see their names and logos on your screen now. So thank you to those organizations, and our sincere thanks to your participation in this event. And economic development access to the latest data sets and analytical tools can make the difference between communities, regions, and states that move ahead and flourish and those that get left behind. This is true with or without pandemics. As you can see, my hair is being left behind. I got my social distancing haircut. But before we move into this, I wanted to introduce our moderator today, Crystal Morphus. Crystal will be moderating. She's a founder and principal of Creative Economic Development Consulting, LLC in Elkin. She has worked as a local developer as well as a location advisor and strategic planning consultant. Crystal is a longtime NCEDA member and thought leader, and we're fortunate to have the benefit of her vision as part of the professional development community. Crystal will be moderating a panel that includes, in alphabetical order, Jeff DeBillis, Director of Economic and Policy Analyst at the North Carolina Department of Commerce's Labor and Economic Analysis Division. That's a mouthful. He's worked for the last 8 years. Jeff also serves on the staff of the North Carolina Small Business and Technology Development Center and RTI International. Followed by Morgan Ross. Morgan is a senior research manager at Wake County Economic Development. She oversees the production of reports, proposals, and presentations for the very active organization. Morgan was previously a brokerage assistant at Avison Young, a global commercial real estate firm, which we all know very well. And we have Elizabeth Sapp, a research manager at the Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina. Elizabeth previously worked at NC Commerce, where she was liaison to the Governor's North Carolina Works Commission, a key nexus of the state's workforce development system. This is an elite group, and we're grateful to all of them for being with us to share their insight. With that, I'll turn the webinar over to our moderator, Crystal Morphus. Thanks, Crystal.
Good afternoon, Josh, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to be with you and glad to be moderating this panel of top researchers in North Carolina. As Josh mentioned, this webinar was born out of a membership survey, and each of you said or responded in the survey some things that you wanted to learn. You wanted to learn about new tools. You wanted to learn about appropriate tools for your organization and your research needs, as well as some trends and changes. So we're going to talk about several of those tools this afternoon, and hopefully you'll find one that meets your specific research needs. What you'll find is that the right tool depends upon your organization and what you're trying to accomplish, really what you're trying to answer with data. I'm going to lead off with a few comments about one of the data tools. If you'll go ahead and go to the next slide, I'll lead off on one of the data tools, Jobs EQ, and just talk a little bit about it. After I talk about Jobs EQ, Elizabeth and Morgan and Jeff are going to talk about some other tools that you listed on our survey. And MZ, Esri are a couple of tools, as well as some of the government data resources that are available. So we're going to profile each of these, compare and contrast them, and I'm sure you'll find one that works for you. So a little bit about Jobs EQ. This is an opening screen for Jobs EQ, and I'm going to show you some of the slides so you'll get a feel for it. It is a web workforce analytics program that is produced by Chimera Economics and Analytics out of Richmond, Virginia. Many of you know that Chris Chimera and her team. In fact, you may have been listening to several of her webinars over the last few weeks on the economy. I have, and I found them very interesting. Jobs EQ provides employment, wages, and demographic data all the way down to the zip code level. You can define regions, you can create radii and drive times. So it's a really powerful tool that can give you a lot of levels of information. You see on this screen several starting points. It's pretty intuitive and easy to use. I'm going to talk about the first one, the industry snapshot, and show you a little bit about what it'll do. But you'll see several other ones like awards and occupation information and other types of industry data. On this industry snapshot, we pulled manufacturing data in North Carolina. You'll see that the first one there, just for an example, shows food manufacturing, employment, wages, employment change, shows you trends. And it also shows you exits, how many people are leaving and transferring jobs. So there's a lot of information. And you can click on each one of these industries and drill down to find more deeper data on each one of them. And that cute little export button up to the right, you can export data in a PDF or an Excel sheet. One of the features I like is when you can export it, it's easy to clip it and put it in a PowerPoint. You'll notice several of the tools that this team talks about has some ways to export that information into your presentation so it's easy to tell a story with that data. One of the other buttons I'm going to highlight is Skills Gap. We talk a lot about workforce skills and needs. It'll be a little bit hard to read maybe on a smaller screen, but you'll see at the top demand, skills that are in demand, like nursing, medical assistant, for example, commercial driver's license. And you'll see at the bottom those skills, which we have plenty of. And this again is a North Carolina pool. You can pull this by county, by zip code. You can make a region of multiple counties. And then you can compare and contrast the information. But that's just one level of data. The next one is real-time data. And that's something that you asked about on the survey, was real-time trends and information. This is one of the add-ins you can include in your Jobs EQ subscription. This shows job postings by date. And I'll just point out, it's pretty interesting. You'll see to the far right there a real decline of job postings. If you were to go back further, you could see a decline off because of the pandemic. I did want to note here on the far right-hand side of your screen, you'll see the regional filters. This is how easy it is to, like I typed in North Carolina, you could type in Surrey County, or you could type in some zip codes and create your region. And then there's several different ways to filter the data. So it's pretty intuitive to use, pretty easy to figure out. And the next one is on awards. We all want to know more about our talent pipeline. So for this, you'll see I pulled up Cumberland County and I pulled up Fayetteville Tech. And you can see the number of people that are graduating each year in certain certificate programs. So you'll know that, let's go down to maybe accounting. There are 101 people that graduate from Fayetteville Tech in accounting each year. And that's important information if you're trying to figure out how many people are coming out of my community college system with a certain degree or certificate to help with that talent pipeline. Again, you can pull it up by different schools and universities in your region, other regions. If you have a wider subscription in the state, you can compare your community to communities in other places that you're competing against. Just to maybe summarize the Jobs EQ program a little bit, I haven't checked the price lately, but the last time I checked, I think it was around $5,000 a year for a county subscription. But before you jump into a county license, see if somebody else has a license on your behalf. We often find that a regional organization will have a regional license, but maybe the county isn't accessing it or leveraging that regional license. So check and see if one of your regional partners has a program, any of the programs we're talking about today, that you'll be able to use before you spend your own money. And as we go forward in learning more about NZ, ESRI, and other tools, you kind of may be thinking, where do I start in terms of finding the data tool that's right for me? I would suggest you create a list of data questions that you're trying to answer in your community. They could be questions like, what is my talent pipeline? Or how can I understand more of the clusters in my community? Or how can I understand occupational and skills gaps need in my community? So think of those data questions and then just do some demos. Go through with a list of companies and ask for online demos, and then use trial periods. I like to set up trial periods that are simultaneous. So for example, we had a trial period with MZ at the same time we had one with Jobs EQ. So when I had a data question I was trying to answer, I looked at that question from different perspectives, from the two different tools, and I looked at the output that it gave us, and from that determined which one met our needs better. So I suggest you do demos, and I suggest you do trial periods, and if you can coincide them to answer those questions, I think it'll give you a good idea of what tool is good for you. So I'm going to go ahead now and turn it over to Elizabeth Saba, and then I'm going to be monitoring the Q&A, so just put your questions in there. When we get to that, I'll be glad to get your question answered.
Thank you, Crystal. Hello, everybody. I'm Elizabeth Saba. I'm the research manager at EDPNC. Thanks for taking the time to join the webinar today. Today, I'm going to focus on three main things: the workforce analytics tool we use at EDPNC and why, the advantages and disadvantages, and then how we use workforce data to understand our state and market our state and respond to RFPs. So from learning about the results of the professional development survey, it was clear you all wanted to learn a little bit more about subscription-based tools too. MZ is the main workforce analytics tool we subscribe to. It's an alternative to Jobs EQ. We did a demo with both of them and went through Crystal's process of trying to answer similar questions. And MZ just fit our preferences for what we were trying to answer. So I'm going to focus mostly on MZ. And then I'm also going to briefly touch on some lead data tools you can use to access similar data to MZ, but for free. So D4 is an example of one of those tools. So what kinds of data does MZ provide, and how is that helpful to us as economic developers? MZ provides data from dozens of government sources, all in one place, and it's updated quarterly, so it's very current. As you'll see on the top of the slide, there's buckets of information that MZ provides. And then the bullet points describe what we can do with that information as economic developers. So similar to the Jobs EQ listing of reports and modules, this is what you'll see when you log into MZ. So the first bucket of data is industry data, and this is where you can learn more about the details of industries in certain regions. Occupational data is data on the wages, the current employment, historical and projected employment, things like that. Jobs posting and skills is data on which employers are posting jobs in your region and what are the skill sets that they're looking for. Crystal talked a lot about Jobs EQ. One main difference I've seen between the two tools is that for Jobs EQ, the job posting and skills data is part of their main package. In MZ, it's an add-on. Now, they have been good about turning it on when we've needed it. Like right now, we're trying to identify companies that are experiencing a surge in hiring so we can get the word out to job seekers. The next bucket is programs, and that is data on program completions and educational attainment, things like that. And then also matching occupations to programs. So what programs are preparing those people for those occupations. And then demographic data is data on educational attainment, race, ethnicity, things like that. We can use the data, sorry, please go back. Thanks. To understand our region's strengths and weaknesses so that we can engage in strategic planning activities, to demonstrate our workforce availability, to know our competition, and then to also find regions to target for business recruitment. And one of the tools in MZ is actually called business recruitment, and it lets you enter an industry, and it proposes MSAs that you can target companies from based on your competitive advantages, such as your lower cost of labor, for example. So it's very handy. Next slide, please. Hands down, the biggest advantage to subscription-based tools, and MZ in particular, is that it's user-friendly and easy to navigate. It aggregates data across dozens of government sources, so BLS data, IPEDS data, census data. You can create and save groups, and it aggregates data across the groups that you create, so regional, industry, occupational groups. You can visualize data through heat maps and graphs, which is very handy for clipping and presenting the data to clients. You can compare data across geography, so states, counties, MSAs. Something that's useful to us is we often have to determine information around a certain site, and so you can set a drive time radius through MZ. And then also provides information at the zip code level, which we sometimes get asked about. Some disadvantages is there is a subscription required. Pricing ranges everywhere from, I've heard, $9,000 up through $20,000, depending on the kinds of data you want. And if you want, just a certain region or the whole US. The methodologies may differ from state and federal sources. MZ uses public data as its base, but then it also has statisticians that are employed by them, and they will model different data to fill in gaps and get really granular. And so sometimes numbers will differ, so it's important to cite MZ as the source. And then sometimes other sources may provide better accuracy. We found as a team that particularly educational data, sometimes data on net migration or veterans, we just find it easier to go to other sources to pull that information. All right, so I just want to share a quick example of how I've used MZ to answer a question. So here I was interested in two things. One, on pulling data on North Carolina's textile sector for an RFP I was working on, and also I'm in the process of updating our textiles and nonwovens brochure. And so my first goal in all of this was trying to understand how to define the textile industry. And if you can look at the top left, you'll see that there's 13 industries. Now, MZ has predefined industry groups in its database. And one of the industry groups are the Harvard cluster industry groups. And so textiles is one of those. So I quickly chose that one. It includes those 13 different industries. And then I'm able to pull up all the comparative data across states to see kind of where we rank on a variety of factors like jobs, payroll business locations, location quotients, and even wage information about the industry. So as you can see, we're second in the US in terms of amount of jobs in the textile industry. I can toggle between those 13 industries, and actually when I just pull up nonwovens, we have the largest nonwovens workforce, which is great because a lot of projects we're seeing right now are in the engineered fabric space. And so I'm quickly able to download this data, export it, and have comparative data across states that we're competing against. And as you can see at the top under industry map, you can change the state level to MSA, to county, in any kind of region that you want. Next slide, please. And so the second question I wanted to understand was, what are the top occupations within the textile industry? And so as you can see on the top left, I pulled in those same 13 industries, and I pulled up the staffing patterns tool, which allows you to see the top occupations in that industry, which really helps me get information back to the client about, wages for certain occupations, annual openings, any kind of data that they'd want on that occupation. And so these are the top occupations in the industry for the US. As you can see, the nation is set as the geography. And then I'm able to see which occupations make up at least 1% of total employment in the industry, and I'm able to check the boxes. And then next slide, please. I pulled up that information specific to North Carolina. So what's different about this slide is the geography has changed to North Carolina. And I'm able to see the information for North Carolina and then pull in, you know, other states or geographies we're competing against to see how we compare from a workforce availability and cost perspective. So really quickly, I want to show the LEAD resources, public resources you can use to pull similar kinds of information. So LEAD has something called the Staffing Patterns Tool, very similar to the one in MZ. And I was really happy to learn about it a few years ago. You're able to type in a 3-digit NAICS code and it pulls up the top occupations employed in that industry, which is really helpful for solving that problem. Again, what are the top occupations in an industry, which, you know, sometimes a client will supply job titles and sometimes they just won't. So we're having to kind of do that work. Next slide, please. And then using that occupational information, you can access D4, another great LEAD resource, where you can pull occupational data and also industry data. You can set various geographies. One thing I've noticed is you can't set a drive time. So looking at information around a site, you can't really do, but you can pull information for MSAs and counties. And then also it's North Carolina specific. So, you know, we're often having to quickly and easily pull in information about different regions and states so we can easily compare things. But if your goal is to find North Carolina information, this is a really handy tool. So with that, I just encourage you to explore the great tools out there. There's a lot of different ones. With that, I'll turn it over to Morgan Ross, who can offer more of a local economic developer perspective. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. My name is Morgan Ross. I am the Senior Research Manager for Wake County Economic Development. And we also use MZ as well as some other tools, but we have a subscription to MZ over JobsEQ, so we utilize that a lot. Today I'm going to talk about Site to Do Business. It is a combination of a couple tools, but the main one is the Business Analyst tool, and that is created by Esri and the Site to Do Business organization. Next slide. Awesome. So this is what the dashboard looks like when you first open it. As you can see, there are several different tools. The pictometry one, it gives you high def images of, you know, certain sites. Database USA is a great source to find, you know, a list of businesses, you know, based on certain parameters. But we're going to focus on the Business Analyst tool as well as ArcGIS Online. So yes, next slide, perfect. So this is an example of what the Business Analyst tool does. So the Business Analyst tool is really, it combines the demographic, lifestyle, and spending data with map-based analytics to create accurate reports and market insights. It also, you know, allows you to create the ArcGIS component allows you to create and share these interactive web maps using your own data in combination with the data available they have. And the reason I use these tools is because they are quick, easy, and accessible, and they have access. It's a large access to you know, robust data. Sorry, go back one more slide. Sorry. So some of the advantages of the Business Analyst tool is that there's no limit on geography. You can compare different metros and areas all across the United States. You can create your own geography boundaries, you know, by either drawing it, you know, by setting a drive time radius or just a by mile radius. It's kind of unlimited, and it breaks down, the geography breaks down all the way to the census tract and block groups, which that can get very granular. So that's that's pretty nice. A lot of other programs don't really get down that deep on the geography level. So that's probably one of the biggest advantages, I'd say. And a lot of times while we use this program because we can't get that from other programs. So next slide, please. So one of the great things that we use this program for is the created comprehensive reports that they have available. And this is just an example of one. It's the community profile report, but it's pretty in-depth, but still a short, still a snapshot of a community. And if you look close, it's kind of blurry, but you can see, so this one is based off of a particular site, and it's the drive time, 3 different drive time radiuses, 10, 20, and 30-minute drive time radiuses. And then it breaks down demographic data, population, household, housing units, median household, home value, per capita income, median age, and then it goes, in depth. You can go to the next slide. It breaks down education, attainment, marital status. It briefly touches on the labor force and the unemployment rate. That general statistic could sometimes be a little off, but it briefly touches on, employed and a breakdown by the industry. And then it also goes into, it'll break down your race. It breaks down by age. And it also does this, it does it for 3 different, time periods. It does it for, it gives you a 2010, look at the population, and then it gives you 2019 and a projection of 2024, which is nice. And this is based off of, they pull this from the U.S. Census data, and they are estimates that Esri has created with their own methodology, but we find them pretty accurate, and they're great snapshots to use. We use this report a lot. It's probably one of my favorite, but there's a list of over 20. If you'll go to the next slide. This is a list of all the reports you can get, and it just is a combination of all the data they have. And it also, not only do they have these pre-made reports, you can go in and create your own reports. And then there's also what they have called infographics, and it's, the same kind of data, but, with infographics and just, pretty little visual on a 1-pager. So you really can get really detailed with this. And again, this report is pulled for whatever site or boundary you want to determine. And that's the great part is, it can be a boundary, whether it's a county, zip code, or it can be an actual location with a radius and drive time. But the possibilities are endless. But the community profile report is probably one of the main ones I use a lot. They have a new one, the crime summary, which is pretty great because it has, it can go pretty in depth for a small area, which is hard to find elsewhere. We use the business summary profile a lot. It's pretty good. It breaks down how many workers, how many residents, breaks down the industry. The only disadvantage I'd say of Site to Do Business is the level of actual workforce data that they have available. Like you saw in the community profile report, it breaks down, it will tell you how many jobs and establishments are in each major industry, but it won't break down much further than that, like no average wages, detailed by specific SOC code occupations. It doesn't get that detailed, and that's where we use NCEDA, but it's still a great snapshot. So let's see, we also, okay, next slide, please. So this is just an example or a screenshot of the kind of all the variables and data stats they have available. And this is just the initial view, but it covers population, education, jobs, behaviors. They have a lot of data points available. So it's really helpful in that sense. And they also they're easily exported and in a nice report that's very easy to grab. So also, yes, they, so not only do they have all these variables available, they kind of allow you to create your own variables, whether that's okay, you want to know how many people are between age 15 and 20, you can create that own variable so you don't have to go and manually add something like that up, which is really cool. You can kind of do a lot of things. Like you also can create these color-coded maps, and that's really where the Site to Do Business tool comes in. It's a, it's an interactive map tool. So that is the best part about it. Not only, you can also import your own data and manipulate it and combine it with the business tools data. So those are the biggest advantages. It is affordable. I'd say more so affordable than some of the other tools we use. We have, we share a subscription with a regional partnership, and our costs annually are around $450, which is a lot more affordable than some of these other programs. So it's a lot more accessible to some of the smaller municipalities that we work with. Some of the disadvantages, like I said, the workforce data is not as in depth. It's almost, the capabilities are so robust, it can also sometimes be too much, but they have a great webinar that you can take to learn and whatnot. And exporting data, you can export data, obviously the reports and whatnot, and you can export it into Excel, but it's not as malleable. You can't like manipulate it as easily, but the reports are definitely the best. And then the ArcGIS tool that incorporates, that is also a separate tool. The best part about this is that you can create your own maps in the Business Analyst and then share that map to ArcGIS online and create a shareable link of a map that you can send to anyone. And as long as they have that link, they can see and observe this map. So this is an example of a map that we created. It is like a list of the major advanced manufacturing companies in the region with 250 employees and over. And it is broken down by the different types of manufacturers, and they're color coded. You could change this map. This is data that we imported, but you can also go in and add data that is pulled from from this tool. But then you could change this so the dots are based off the size of the company and not the type of company. But then, so we imported this data, and then we were able to export it and share this map to, it was for a particular project on an RFI, and they wanted to see, a map of major manufacturers in the area. So this is just an example of how we would use it. We use it for our targeted growth areas and to with our municipalities, so we can go in and we'll overlay that map with a major employer's map and available sites, and then you can go in and really see what your community's assets and advantages are, and as well as your weaknesses and opportunities. So those are just a couple examples of how we use it, but I want to hurry up and finish so I don't take too long. But the biggest advantage is it's a combination of the data with the interactive map and being able to create your own boundaries and generate reports based off that. So I think that's about it. We also use some of these other tools that Jeff is about to talk to you about, and these main ones are subscription based, but there are a lot of tools that are free, and they're free, but then they're not as easy to pull from, or they're not as interactive, and doesn't print out a report as nice. But these are this is just one of the tools we use, but there are several more free ones that are just as great, that do some of these similar demographic reports. So I am going to pass that over to Jeff, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Morgan. That was a great segue into what I'm going to show, which is free resources. And it was a nice segue in that, we're talking about free government sources. And yes, they're not as attractive and easy to navigate, but still is the foundation for a lot of, if not most of what you've seen so far. We go to the first slide. Elizabeth already kind of introduced D4. If you're not familiar with LEAD, and some of you may not be if you're new to economic development in North Carolina, we are the federal state partner for the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So the data that underlies all those reports that you've seen, information that you may have gathered from BLS itself or from some of these sites is generated by LEAD. We have two databases, both of which can be a little tricky to navigate, but we do offer training, so please contact me if you are interested, or if you even just want a little tutorial. I or one of our LEAD staff would be happy to walk you through how to use and access this data. But here you can get information on business and business establishments down to the county level, by industry, by size. So if you're looking for small businesses or those that have under 10 employers, you can get that information through D4 or Access NC through our QCW program. We have information on jobs and industry median wages. If you want to explore a little deeper, we have our occupation employment statistics program. You can advance that shows the actual occupations within the industries in North Carolina. We talked about staff, Elizabeth mentioned staffing patterns. So if you're looking for occupations within the textile industry in North Carolina, you can access that there. We have a range of wages. So we have those from the 10th percentile all the way up to the 90th percentile, median, averages. So you get a wide range of what pay is like in North Carolina, and that data is available by MSA and by county currently. We will be moving over in the next publication of the data to MSA and non-MSA geography. So we'll be a little bit more limited, but we'll walk you through it to help get you the best information for your county. And then lastly, we have our labor force statistics, our local area unemployment statistics program, or LAUS, if you can advance it, where you can get labor force data, number of employed, unemployed, the unemployment rate, which everybody is keenly following now. We produced this by county, by MSA, and even by city, municipality. So you can access that all through D4 or Access NC. And like I said, contact me if you need some assistance in gathering that information. We also have additional resources on NC Careers. This site is undergoing a major renovation. It'll be a lot more intuitive for people to actually explore occupations and careers. But the data and data set tools that are there will continue to survive. The crossover will happen probably in June, July. But right now you can access this, and we'll be able to through tools.nccareers.org. Here you can get occupation projections. We do this for 16 labor market areas across North Carolina, covering the entire state. You can do that through Star Jobs. If you're looking for industry employment, we have our employment projections tool. And then, as Elizabeth already mentioned, we have our staffing patterns tool. And one thing that she failed to mention is that if you're looking for wage differences between occupations across different industries, you can access it there. So an administrative assistant will make a different salary working in financial services than they will in retail. So you can find that information out in staffing patterns. You can also access staffing patterns at a much more granular level and by geography using Access NC. So what are the advantages? Why should you use LEAD over some of the higher priced but glossier tools out there? The first is quality. We get the data from the source. So whether that is through surveys direct to businesses or through administrative data, like our QCW program. So we're getting it directly from the source. This is generally thought of by economists and analysts as the higher quality information. We produce this at a fairly granular level, mostly at county and regional labor market information levels. And it is data that's comparable to other geographies. Every state is capturing the same information. You can access it on the Bureau of Labor Statistics site. What are some of the disadvantages? Well, there is a time lag. It does take a little while for us, for the economic activity to occur, and then for it to be reported, gathered, and then distributed. So for things like our QCW program, which deals with business establishments, there's typically a 6-month time lag between when that activity happened and when it is reported. Right now, we're just getting out the 4th quarter of last year. There's also data suppression issues. Since this data comes from employers and it's from their administrative records, we don't want to release anything that is confidential to an employer. So in those instances, we have to suppress cells, so we can't show anything. So there may be some issues where we know that an industry exists in a county, but there's nothing that we can report because it's only 1 or maybe 2 businesses that exist. The private vendors will go and use other data and take a guess as to what those might be, but we are not allowed to report that. And we are limited on geographies for the same reason. Data suppression, the smaller the geography, the greater chances there are of releasing something that would be identifiable to an employer. So we are somewhat limited in those geographies. We are also a partner, and we take this data working with the U.S. Census Bureau to support their LEHD program, their longitudinal employment dynamics program. We take this and they combine it with some of the data that they receive from the ACS, American Community Survey data. And so they are able to take and match both employees as well as employers and have a great tool called On the Map that allows you to identify your geography or create custom geographies. Then you can, next, you can look at where people commute to and where people commute from. And then you can also break that information down into, are they commuting to businesses in very limited industries, goods producing, service providing, certain wage categories, and you can look at certain demographics as far as age and race. With this, you can produce some pretty interesting maps, looking at the distance and direction of commuting. You can look at this by county and look at an origin destination map and see from a bigger perspective what percentage of your workers are commuting into a certain county or out of your county. And then lastly, you can look at inflow outflow. How many workers are coming into work? How many workers are staying where they live in your community and working locally, and how many are leaving? So it's a great tool, especially if you're trying to do a labor shed analysis and you want to see how far you should be looking for commuters, and where you can be drawing labor from. Great free resource called On the Map. We put together a little cheat sheet, a little more than a cheat sheet, in our division. So if anybody wants to help, it is a little clunky, let me know, and we'll send you the cheat sheet to help walk you through it. Lastly, there's the QWI. This is another product of the Census LEHD program. This matches, again, where people live and where people work. But this is focused on where the businesses are located. So it's data by county, by MSA, even by workforce board level. You can get industry information. You can get down to firm age and size. So those of you who are looking for small business statistics, or those that are, are fairly young, those who are newly started businesses, you can get data there. And then you can look at information by employment by race and sex and age, as well as wages by different demographics. Don't have time to get into a whole bunch more, but I did provide this. If you're looking for free resources, there is Reference USA and a living wage calculator. And then I have a few tools here for those of you who are looking for some really interesting new alternative data for the COVID situation. So that's all available in your packet that will be sent out to you. Crystal, take it away.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Now we're going to go into some moderated questions. So if Jeff and Morgan and Elizabeth would turn on their microphones and their video. While they're doing that, I'll say that I've used, I think, almost all of these sources, and they all have their advantages and disadvantages. If I had to sum it up, I think NCEDA does a better job with educational related information, is a little stronger in that area, where I think Jobs EQ may be a little stronger in the occupation or workforce and industry data, maybe a little bit. The ESRI data is really great for the demographics. And then if you're just looking at a quick look at your county data, I love the D4 system. It's kind of my go-to every time looking up some information. And the commuting patterns, I love the Census on the Map. So they're great advantages and disadvantages of each one of them. Before we get into some other questions, there is one in the Q&A, and I encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A. There's one from, I think it's Tommy Turner. Hi, Tommy. It's good that you're here. He asked about the cost associated with subscriptions. And I'll tell you, Tommy, it's different for people like you and me in the private sector than it is for economic development organizations. So if you're an economic development organization, Jobs EQ is about $5,000 a year. Or if your region has a license, you can get a login. I think it's for about $500 or so a year. But on the private side, the annual subscriptions for that will run anywhere from like maybe $10,000 to $25,000 a year, depending upon the geographies that you are going to buy the license for. Same thing with MZ. There's that wide range of probably $9,000, $10,000 up to $20,000 or more. And Tommy, I know that you said you've done it by the project. I think MZ will do a turn on, turn off, so you can turn it on for a month or two if you're working a project that you need the data, and turn it off so you don't have to pay the annual subscription. And I know Jobs EQ will do something kind of like that too. A little tip in terms of ESRI data, if you just buy an ESRI subscription, it's probably $2,500 or more. But if you do what Morgan suggested and go in through Site to Do Business, it's like $1,500 a year. Now there's a little limitation there, but because you're going through that association, you get a much better deal. So, so it is wide ranging, and it depends on whether you are like an economic development nonprofit, government, or whether you're somebody in the private sector trying to access those resources.
Yeah,
So,
one thing,
yes.
one thing to add for the Site to Do Business. So we share, I'm not sure how many people are a part of it, but we split it or in a partnership with the RTRP. So if you are in RTRPs, if you're in that partnership, I think, like I said, we pay $450 annually. I'm not sure how that's split across, but Site to Do Business, where some of the other ones are very like particular about how many logins you have and who you can share it with and that type of thing. Site to Do Business, it lets you split it with multiple organizations and it not be an issue. So that's just one thing to add. Sorry.
Tommy commented back that he's paid about $1,500 per project. Now with the Esri, you can't get the workforce analytics that you can get with MZ or JobsEQ. So it's there's always some give and take there. But just to kind of start us off with a few other questions while I'll monitor the Q&A, and I'll ask this to Morgan. What is a limitation of a resource that you often use, and how do you work around it? Because each one of these has limitations. What's the hurdle you constantly bump up against and you have to figure out how to get around?
Let's see. I would say, well, particularly for us, a lot of times we're pulling data for Wake County, or we're pulling it for a project. Sometimes, they're looking at the broader region. So we, pull it for Raleigh MSA plus the Durham SA, which, MSA, they're two separate ones. A lot of times is being able to, get, MZ is a great one that allows you to combine certain boundaries, but I'd say Site to Do Business, or not Site to Do Business, but I'd say some of those tools, especially the free database tools, they don't let you combine data. So I'd say that's one of the weaknesses. And then also, I guess the how granular you can get in the geography. Sometimes a municipality needs it for their, for a zip code, but some of the MZ's data, they have it down to the zip code, but sometimes it's not all of it. It's not always available. So I'd say those two things. But and then also comparing. So for us, we have MZ, but it only is the geography of North Carolina. So we can't compare to other states or other areas. Whereas Elizabeth, I think she has access to the whole state or to the whole nation, but they pay I think 3 times as much as we do. So you kind of get some of those issues, but we work around them.
Elizabeth, what is a really cool or neat feature of one of the tools that you use or resource that just makes research easier? But I think of, like, for example, you can go to D4 and pull up the counties to make a region and pull up the information and aggregate it, but it's just easy to save that region one time and keep pulling that data for it. But what's a neat feature of a tool that you use?
Yeah, so I think when it has a visualization component, I'm a very visual person, and so when I can see the data, up on a map, it really helps me to kind of process it. And that's one thing I like about MZ is it's very visual. I've actually heard JobsEQ has a little bit more robust mapping capabilities, and there's data layers that you can turn on and off, like location of universities and community colleges. And so, I mean, that's just something I wanted to throw out there, that if, looking for a mapping tool is more what you're looking for, JobsEQ might be something you want to look at in their mapping capabilities. MC doesn't have that, at least not yet. It's just kind of, different heat maps, but not layers. And there are free resources that visualize data too, like datausa.io. Actually a tool that Jeff kind of reminded me of kind of recently. It's developed by Deloitte, and it has, and it's based on census data. But it has a visualization tool built into it where you can see data across, different counties and geographies, all pulled in from the census. It's really wonderful. And then data.census.gov, which they're transitioning data to, has a mapping component too. It's a little bit more finicky. I'm still playing around with it and trying to figure it out. But it is trying to build in some of those visualization components as well.
I'm going to ask Jeff this next question, and then I'll ask Morgan and Elizabeth to chime in as well. Jeff, you've got some slides that if people look at this presentation afterwards, that has some additional data or resources that would be helpful during these unprecedented times. If an economic developer asked you about 4 or 5 data points that they should use in a dashboard, to really understand what's happening during this time, and understanding that most data is lagged, although we did just get unemployment claims data by county, which is awesome. What are those 4 or 5 data points that you would suggest they put on their dashboard?
Well, it depends what your purpose of your dashboard is. Right now, I know everybody wants to know, what's whether it's claims information, and as Crystal said, we do have a dashboard out now that we put out, which will allow you to see claims by county. But I think, if you're, what I've been interested in and what I've been following, and it's in the slides that you'll see, are alternative data sources. So you're not going to get unemployment rates. You're not going to get jobs that are in demand. You're just going to have to be patient for that, because a lot of that stuff hasn't been decided yet by the marketplace. But there is information on, for instance, people traveling. So a lot of cell phone data records are being assembled in aggregate. There's a company called Streetlight that produces this data and has a free tool on their website that maps vehicle miles traveled and compares that to January's average. So you can look at it by day, by county. You can download it. You can request to receive that data, like I do. Every 3 days, they'll email it to you, so you can see trends and see which counties are traveling more. Does it mean a whole lot? I don't know. I'm not quite certain about the quality of the data, since it is somewhat new. And just because people are out traveling does not necessarily mean that they're spending money. But it is an interesting proxy. University of Maryland has a resource as well. So there are a few things out there using some technology that you may want to keep track on, especially if folks locally are asking you, what's happening within our community right now.
Morgan, are there any data points on your dashboard that you're tracking right now in addition to those?
So we, like he said, it's really hard. The data that's released at the minimum, at the max, it's monthly. So a lot of those things that people want to know, it's not available. But obviously the number of jobs, the unemployment rate, those type of things. NCEDA actually put out a free tool, and we'd be happy to share it. But it's literally a kind of a breakdown of jobs by day. And I'm not 100% sure, how, actually where that comes from, but they're making it available to the public, and it, by day is probably the most in-depth I've seen yet, showing where the jobs lost are. And then you can compare it to different areas and different time periods. So that's the one tool I've seen. Obviously everyone wants to know where, layoffs are and whatnot. We, not just because of COVID, but in general, we track new and expanding companies' announcements, but we do that manually, whether it's through Google or articles that are released. But keeping that up to date has been important, because not just because we, obviously a lot of people, have lost their jobs. We still are adding jobs. We still are having companies move here. We just had a new huge bandwidth announcement where we're bringing, over 1,100 jobs. So people, we like to think that people also want to see that as well. So we continue to share that. And a lot of it, I'd say, is more qualitative, not quantitative, or because, so for instance, we've reached out to site selectors across the region that we have contacts with, and get a pulse of them from them about their projects levels and what's happening, and we've been posting blogs about that. So a lot of it is just actual conversations and whatnot. But the NCEDA tool is the best thing I've seen. That's kind of like a daily data source.
Elizabeth, we have just less than a minute left. Are there any data points that are on your dashboard?
No, I'd like to definitely jump in. In addition to those, economic, GDP, unemployment rate, and some of the, COVID metrics that the governor's office is tracking, You know, at EDPNC, we've had the opportunity to speak to some site selectors, and we're hearing kind of like Morgan was saying, that although data is important, there's a lot of cases where in some cases it's probably not the most helpful right now. Rather, anecdotes about, you know, flexibility and adaptability will be more helpful, because a lot of data right now is, you know, outdated and all over the place and a little bit useless. So some things we can look at are, you know, how has your community seized this moment of disruption to retrack workers? How did the broadband experiment go in your community? How are you protecting, you know, educational throughput and short-term credentialing? And then those anecdotes about, you know, individual successes and company experiences, like, you know, certain company called 100% of its workforce and got X% back. Things like that. Stories might resonate more than numbers right now in some cases.
Well, thank each of you for sharing today. And if I had one thing to leave our audience with, it would be to think about the questions you want to answer with data, and then that will lead you to the right source, and try out several different sources answering those questions before you dive in. So now I'll turn it over to Josh to close.
Thank you, Crystal, and thank you to all our panelists for the great guidance. That concludes today's webinar. We hope you found it valuable. Our thanks go out again to NCEDA's annual sponsors for their support for programs like this. And we know some of you are already planning to join us on Thursday at 10 a.m. for the next installment of NCEDA's webinar offerings from recession to recovery, assessing the economic and financial impact of COVID-19. Join EDPNC's Chris Trung as he moderates a discussion by economist Mark Bittner of Wells Fargo and Peter Gwaltney, president of the North Carolina Bakers Association. Electricities is sponsoring that one. It should be very worthwhile. Again, that's Thursday, the day after tomorrow at 10 a.m. If you're not registered, visit our website and to learn more. Until then, stay connected, stay informed, stay confident, and stay well. Thank you, everybody.